It's been a really interesting few years as somebody who's been involved with cloud and DevOps, because the world has changed much more quickly than I ever expected. So I first got involved with cloud stuff about 6-7 years ago. Amazon didn't have VPC, didn't have IAM. It was just these, you didn't even have EBS backed volumes or anything along those lines. I had not heard of DevOps at all. I didn't really know what that was. And I found myself having to create all these techniques as I was building my own stuff out, as Josh said, because I couldn't find products to do demos and stuff. And where we are now is organizations are adopting this on a scale that I never expected. We are 3 years easily ahead of where I expected large enterprises to be in terms of adopting cloud and DevOps. And the problem with that is that, you know, it's great. A lot of the stuff that we talk about in our environments, of course I lost my VPN connection, so I'll deal with that when we get to that part of the session, but let's get it off this. Oh, it's not on your screen, it's just on mine. So one of the problems that we have as we work in this environment is the first time you get started in cloud, and most enterprises I work with, this is how they get started. They don't say, we're moving everything to Amazon in 6 months. They say, hey, we've got this one team, this one project, they're gonna start something, it's pretty isolated, and even when things are centrally managed, I'm not talking about any of that shadow IT garbage, sanctioned projects, they get up and running, they start working, and security gets involved and sets some policies to manage things, and you kind of get stuff locked down. You've got your one account, maybe a couple of virtual networks, VPCs in there, but then all of a sudden all these other teams start adopting cloud and technologies, and this stuff blows up. And you end up dealing with a lot more different accounts, and you go from your known, established, secure design patterns that you're happy with. This is actually the new version of secureSys.com we're deploying onto Amazon. That's the architecture I sent to my developers. But then that blows apart, because now all of a sudden you're dealing with all sorts of different design patterns and templates and architectural needs, teams that want their own deployment pipelines and different deployment pipelines and tool chains, and everything changes. It's a different world when you're going from your one DevOps project to having to support these things at scale in large enterprises. In the projects that I'm involved with, I recommend at a minimum, you're usually gonna have 3 to 5 different cloud accounts per project. Now, some of what I'm going to talk about today is very Amazon-centric, because that's where I've been doing most of my work, so forgive me for that, but a lot of this applies to other providers. So you're going to walk in, you're going to have a minimum of 3 to 5 Amazon accounts per project. And then, if you think about it, the number from Gartner from years ago, and I don't know if this is still accurate, it was very accurate when I worked there, is any organization, you have to have at least one custom application in your organization per 100 employees. So do the math on your custom applications and the amount of cloud accounts that you have, and it blows up very quickly. Shannon has talked about this. She talked earlier today, and are we allowed to mention the number of accounts you guys have? 1,800 cloud accounts. 1,800. Johnson & Johnson, who talked at Amazon's reInvent conference, they have hundreds of accounts. And organizations scale to this much more quickly than they realize. And so this is rugged DevOps at scale. Because we have to take a lot of the techniques, a lot of the things like James is talking about, a lot of things like everybody here has been talking about all day, and how do we scale that out for large enterprise environments? Because that is an entirely different problem. I am sick and tired of people, like a new vulnerability comes out and then it gets exploited, and security researchers are like, haha, why didn't you just patch that? Have you ever had to patch 100,000, 200,000 systems going back years? That is a whole different world, people. And I think we need to be understanding of the challenges at scale. So I've got only 20 minutes and I got to do demos and somehow log into my VPN. So let's go through this quickly. How do you actually do it? Well, I like to break it out into a few areas. The first is we're going to talk about actually how to become a security organization that can provide resources to basically teams and teams and teams of DevOps throughout your organization. I'm not going to talk much about hardening your distributed pipelines, your distributed deployment pipelines, but we'll mention a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about automation, because that's where I spent all of my time, and that's kind of my love in this little world, as Josh was talking about, and dealing with how do you actually code up and automate and manage these things at scale. And so if we look at kind of a rough deployment pipeline, the kind of thing that if you're doing this stuff, you're pretty familiar with these concepts and these tools and these technologies out here. And I like to think about doing a rugged DevOps at scale like building your pipeline for scale. And so we're going to talk about the security repository stuff on one end of the pipeline. Now remember, there's no single pipeline. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about collections and collections of pipelines at scale and hundreds of apps and those kinds of things. But fundamentally, I like to think about what I'm doing on the security side is let's build a security pipeline. And so that's going to start with the kinds of things that you provide in your security repositories. Then we're going to move on to providing scalable security testing. Then we're going to finish up with how do we actually manage these things in production. Because if you think about the pipeline, that's it. You develop your code and you commit it. You run through your testing process. You throw it out in production. And I'm a DevOpsy kind of guy. At least I like to pretend I am. So I think about, from a security perspective, that's how I'm going to try and approach this particular problem, using the language of the people that do this. So let's talk about the security repository. The idea here is that you have to provide everything as much as you can to the organization using the same tools that they use. So tomorrow I'm co-presenting with Bill Shin of Amazon, and one of the things that he really brought up for the presentation we're doing together that he encourages teams to do in enterprises is, have a security repository and have it be Git, okay? Or, well, I mean, there's, I guess, anybody use Subversion still? You poor souls, yeah, so. No offense, you don't look like the youngest person in the room, so I won't hold it against you. Just, ageism is really a terrible thing. But if we actually, think about it, use Git, use the same tools as your developers are going to use. Who writes policies in Markdown? I write everything in Markdown. Okay, I'm currently working with a large enterprise. I'm writing all their security policies out. It's a Markdown document, which sucks because when I give it to them, I have to change it to .txt and explain what Markdown is. But in the end, I'll be able to go ahead and actually generate this and keep it in repositories and stuff if they move down that path. So, from the start, do your policies, make them in Markdown, accept pull requests from teams. There's no reason your security policies can't be something where dev and ops feel like they have a stake in the game. Okay? You don't have to accept every pull request, but you need to be open. So consider yourself pull request curious, and to the best of your ability. And then you still have to run it through audit and everything else. But that's really going to help engage teams on those terms. Also, if you don't know, you can actually chain out Git repos. So if somebody stands up a project, they can actually link back up into the master policy. They can clone that out, and then they can convert that, and then they have their compensated controls in the exact same template in a version repository with full audit logs of everybody who made changes using the exact same tool changes they're using to push the code out that still ties back to you on the security side. Design patterns. Put your design patterns in there. Now this is a little harder because now we're talking about not markdown text formatted documents. And there's a couple of different ways you can do this. Again, you can put PDFs and things in there. If you have things like CloudFormation templates, or I can't remember what they're called on the other cloud providers, but templates to actually deploy environments, you can have standard ones that you have stamped out, you've got approval, you guys can use these. Okay, become basically an advocate for these things and become helpful as a security organization. Because you know what? This speeds up projects. Oh, I've got this template for this kind of deployment and security's already approved it, and all I need to do is deploy it and then track all my changes. How fast is that going to speed up potentially some of these processes? Architectural diagrams, everything. And there's some tools to help you. For example, it might even just be a link into, anybody use Lucid Chart? I've become a fan of that one. It's an online service, but it allows collaborative editing of and commenting of architectural diagrams and such instead of trying to do everything over in Visio. And then security testing. Definitely having your code tests. So James was up here talking about Gauntlet. I love Gauntlet. I promote it all the time. Have your Gauntlet test libraries in there. Have your Chef secure baseline configurations available there. Have your security tests for whichever security tools that you're going to use, your unit testing or whatever else that you want as part of your Jenkins, as part of your pipeline. Provide all baseline library of all of those there. And then as teams go out and develop their own tests for their individual projects, you can pull those things back in. Sorry, I had like a wicked virus until basically 2 days ago, so still have a bit of a cough. So that's all I have to say on providing that security repository, that one source where you can actually use that to provide out in your organizations. Now I'm going to talk about some practical things and some design patterns and architectures because I decided this is going to be a smorgasbord presentation to cover a bunch of different things. And one of the biggest problems that I encounter going into organizations is they really struggle with, how do I know when I've got new cloud accounts? How do I manage all of these when anybody can swipe with the credit card? So this is more of like a quick tips kind of a thing. These are just some practical things that have worked. But if you don't know how many cloud accounts you've got, it makes a lot of the rest of what I'm going to talk about very hard to do. And so you have to have a sense of where those are and who owns those accounts. So one is require consolidated billing if you haven't already used that. And that means everything will come in on one main invoice or a set collection of smaller invoices. And those are usually accessible, like Amazon's is in a CSV. So you can actually pull that out and you can scan the text and look for things like new account numbers in it. And so you can build some security automation around that to help detect new accounts. Now those are ones that have come through official channels. What about the unofficial channels? Really the only way that I found effective is you work with your own accounting department. And when you get a bill from Amazon, for Amazon Web Services or Microsoft for Azure services, those come in not with the same lines as it would be if you buy your toilet paper on Amazon. I know this because I buy my toilet paper on Amazon, but I spend considerably more on Amazon Web Services. Come on, they deliver it to your house. When the drones happen, okay, here's my business model. A little aside here. I'm thinking when Amazon's got the drones coming in, you can leave the window open. And so if you're in the bathroom and you have that moment, because look, it's all been there. And I've got kids and I'm sick of shouting for my 6-year-old to get me a roll of toilet paper. So because who doesn't take a dump with their phone anymore? So you're in there and you can just be out of toilet paper or put a little dash button on the wall, bing, drone, drops it right out the bathroom door, good to go. Is anybody from Amazon in the room? Can I get a percentage of this? All right. Sorry. I kept my pants on. You got that going for you, which is nice. So, all right. So look at the credit card statements to find this stuff. And again, you can do automated scanning and stuff to pull out your accounts, and then you can push that into your automation tools afterwards as well. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the techniques to do that. So let's talk about some of the common design problems that we encounter when you're doing this at scale for cloud and DevOps. One is identity management, because you really want to use, obviously, SAML, single sign-on, to the best of your ability. You don't want to be creating individual admin user accounts across all of your cloud providers. Really, I hate to tell people to buy tools, but sometimes you have to. And going with one of these broker services here typically is the best way to deal with it. The Pings, Oktas, they're the two ones I encounter most common. But there's almost no way around that for managing, just because it speeds up the process. What I have found is if you have to connect in directly to AD, then you have to get the AD teams involved, and then it takes 3 years to provision a new cloud account. So you want to work on being able to take some time to develop the roles and stuff to link in. And you want that federated model where you have that basically that one kind of proxy. The other thing is you do have to have different entitlement matrices for different products. For example, on those plans I'm building for that one company, I have a sample entitlement matrix in there that's a baseline one of which kinds of user accounts can do which kinds of things in the cloud account for production, dev, and test. And then you want to be able to translate that to the roles and the rights within the individual cloud accounts as well. That's still, and we're going to talk about the automation to do that. Now, one thing you do need to also keep in mind is you're going to have code connecting between accounts, like even your central security services accounts. You're not always going to be able to get that to go through that central broker. That tends to be more of a direct connection. And again, depending on your cloud provider, Amazon and Microsoft in particular are pretty good about this with dealing with roles and how they deal with their directory services integrations. So that tends to be the pattern that we keep there. And the main key thing is for scaling up is having some kind of central broker, not everybody connecting Active Directory directly to everything else. Although do watch out, sometimes those things can fall down at certain loads, is what I've heard. So then the next most common thing I encounter is a lot of existing enterprises, if you're moving in, and if you're big enough where any of this matters, you're an existing enterprise, you're going to have some hybrid stuff where you're going to need to connect into an existing data source in your environment. And the problem, what I'm encountering is a lot of clients out there they're trying to make every cloud account they have a hybrid connection back to their data center. And that is absolutely the worst thing you're going to do. That increases the blast radius. That increases complexity of network management, your IP address spacing. It makes it much harder to do automation and immutable infrastructure. All of those things can kind of start to fall apart. So the architecture that I have started to recommend is set up a single account in your cloud provider. That's what I call the Bastion account. And with this, the Bastion hybrid, where this is that one trusted virtual network that connects, and look, it's going to be more than one, okay? This is scale, but conceptually. And then you connect that to the data center over your hybrid, and that's the access to the main piece of data for a series of projects. And then each of those individual accounts can all connect in. Those can be all different cloud accounts throughout the rest of the infrastructure, all connecting in via peering itself. So these all never have a direct connection back to your data center. You have that one bastion to transfer that data in and out and to provide that two-way connection. So architecturally, that's one way to handle it that I've seen used successfully. Now, you still might want a few of these for different kinds, different parts of your data center that you're connecting out into. So it's not you're going to have one like pure, it's the only way into the data center, because your data center should be segmented anyway. So, this customer app stuff. So anybody needs access to that, this is how we get that stuff out the door. And for this partner thing, this is how we get that out the door. 4 minutes? All right. Next, for data transfer, or just skip the hybrid connection period. So using object storage in your cloud provider and transferring that data directly across, there's some really nifty things you can do where you have an account that whole purpose of that account is for you to transfer data from in your enterprise into that cloud provider without having to have a hybrid network connection. And again, you can use cloud files, S3, whichever your cloud provider supports. Those can be done very securely. It is all encrypted in SSL. Whatever is back here does need internet access to provide that. And then you can drop it into a storage bucket there, and it can be a one-way connection. So all of the things that need access to the data can only read that data out. And if they need to write data, they would write it someplace else. There's a bunch of different architectural ways to do this. I've recently did a project similar to this where, it was all very sensitive PCI, not even just PCI, like federally regulated data. And this was the architecture that we decided to use. And then if you want to take that to the next level, there's cool things you can do through automation, like where you drop something into a drop bucket for processing, and then that is securely communicated to fully private networks within your cloud provider. Now again, not every cloud provider supports these capabilities, and my diagrams are Amazon specific because that's where I've modeled these things out to actually go ahead and do it. But it is all real and it is all doable today. And then logging is a really common one. And the trick with logging in cloud tends to be you're going to have your cloud provider's logs, the Cloud Trail for Amazon. I know Microsoft and Google have their beta versions of that as well. And you're going to have logs for servers and stuff. Don't pump all of that back into your enterprise, into your SIEM. It's just too much data bandwidth. It doesn't make sense. What we see people doing is having, for any given project, there will be one kind of central logging account where all the logs from the different accounts associated with that project can go. And then you can do analysis on those using tools like FluidD to figure out when alerts and other data needs to be pushed out to a fully, an escalation process, and then that's what will go ahead and send alerts and sync back to your security operations center. I'm flying through this stuff, and I'm doing that deliberately, so I can have more jokes for Amazon and poop, or more time for jokes about Amazon and pooping. But the reason for that is there's just a ton of these different ways of mixing and matching and doing these out here, and the core message on this particular pattern is per project, log consolidation, then you escalate alerts to also within the cloud, and then only those top-level alerts get pushed out. And it's nice because it also allows projects to look at their own logs without violating security. So the thing with automation is you're going to have some level of a platform for you to be able to actually go ahead and manage all the security across all of these different accounts. Because it's just, you can't go in and manually. You can't use the manual tools with Amazon or with Microsoft or with anything else if you're having to handle this across dozens or potentially even hundreds of accounts. You are going to find that you're going to have to build a platform out. I'm going to show you a little bit about what that looks like and then do a couple of quick demos. And one of the things as well is a lot of the security controls you want built into the cloud account, and that's where this concept of a deployment package comes into. And I'll talk about what that means in a minute. So this is, I'm not going to switch out of display mode just to keep things sped up a little bit. This is actually a version of an architecture for one of these that I've designed that has actually been built, where the concept for how you actually build out one of these platforms, remember, you guys don't want to be building a monolithic application if you're doing this yourself. You want to be able to build a bunch of small stuff and then have it tied in together. Different skills, different scripts, different tools. And so the way that you can divide that up is just have a library of those things that are unified, that you can be more of an event-driven architecture. So that's where this notification service and queue service stuff comes into place. Every cloud provider has those. And by the way, you don't need to build this in every cloud provider. You build it in one, and they can connect to every other cloud provider over API. And you want to have a little bit of a framework around authentication and around scheduling and around logging. But for the rest of it, let the security team write the scripts that we've written, or work with developers to help you write the code to automate those different pieces. But then you want the ability to trigger that out based on either events, based on a schedule, or based on when you actually have manual need. So in this case, for example, I'm going to run an incident response workflow. So I'll pull it in. And then let me get the ID of it that my developer sent me. So oops. $605F. Oh, stupid Amazon made longer ones. 1A7. Hopefully I didn't fat finger that. And then this again is just triggering in the back end a full incident response workflow that if I didn't mess it up, and I think I probably did just mess it up, demo god's not working in my favor, we'll actually go ahead and run that automatically on the back end, doing a bunch of API calls, automation, and oh, there it goes. It actually did run. So I just collected a bunch of metadata. I just quarantined it on the network. I snapshotted all of the instances. I launched a forensic analysis server, connected those snapshots to the forensic analysis server, and a couple of other things. And all of that was just a fully automated script. And then actually did a bunch of analysis around it as well. So in this case, there's basically the instances in the same group may be compromised and a few other analysis pieces that are in there. But if you need to change an instance type, you can use the same platform for that. And so it gives you a way to tie in all of your various pieces together. Now this was pretty. Now I'm going to switch over though and show you the non-pretty versions of it, because I always have to write these as non-pretty versions before I can make them prettier. And one thing that I do like, one concept that I came up with as well around this that I'm about to demonstrate is this concept of a new deployment package. You have a new account in your cloud provider. How do you actually configure all of the security controls in that? And there's a ton of things you may want to do. You may want to take it, how do you configure the logging? How do you push out some initial templates for the VPCs and the security groups and the identity management and all of that? And what that's going to come down to is this concept of building new account deployment packages. So when you set up a new account, you can use the same automation techniques that I just demoed for an incident response process to actually go ahead and affect a new pristine account and implement all of your security controls into that account. So in this case, I'm going to do a simple configuration, which is I'm going to enable monitoring using CloudTrail. If you don't know what that is, it's Amazon. It monitors all the API calls in Amazon. And then I'm going to set it so that if anybody makes an identity management change, it will send me an email. It's kind of a real simple thing. There's like 5 different ways to do that in Amazon. But if you manually configure this, has anybody done it? Even when you know what you're doing, it takes about 15 to 30 minutes to go ahead and manually configure that, just because it's kind of a pain. So instead, let's go ahead and do that through automation. So I got to relog into the instance here and go ahead and run the particular demo. And so as I run this workflow, this is, by the way, what I didn't mention, this is one account, my master security account, accessing a brand new account that I've done nothing with. So I'm now moving from one centralized security account in Amazon to a second account. I just had to set up the identity management link to allow that. And once I can allow that, I can do whatever I need in that account. And then I'm going ahead and I've created the storage bucket, pulled account IDs, set all the privileges, built the new identity management policies that are needed for this, set up the logging trail, setting up the alert. And by the time the end of this is done, this is telling me check my email, and I'm not going to waste time to go ahead and do that. Yes, I got the test message. Set up all the alerts and it's done. So now, if I actually go into that account, which I have here, you can see this was a minute ago. CloudTrail wasn't enabled. And if I go ahead and hit my little refresh button here, now CloudTrail is enabled. If I go over into You can see the trail. It's going to load all of the activity, which there is none at this point. And I just automatically provisioned all of that in a few seconds while you guys were watching, and all the alerts. And I'm not even going to go through the console. There's like 8 different places where stuff just got configured. It is magic. This was the actual list of how I did it. And again, I did that from one central security account that can reach out and touch all the other accounts that are out there. And yes, you can manage privileges so you're not exposing yourself. But then you can get into some really cool stuff. So Amazon had announced something called basically CloudWatch Events, which allows you to do event-driven security. Well, that's the last one. And the idea behind this one is I actually have pushed in security controls into my Amazon account so that if I make a change into that account, the infrastructure within Amazon itself will detect that change. In this case, it's a firewall rule change, a security group rule change, and within 10 seconds, we'll reverse it. And so if I go through, and I actually go ahead and go in, and I've got a security group here. Let's edit that. Let's add a rule to allow HTTPS access. And this can be based on tags and such. The demo code that I've got, that's all up on GitHub. We'll actually go ahead, and you can see that that rule change went in. Now, if I hit refresh, it's probably still there. So I'm going to go back to the slides for a second because it's not fully instantaneous. And I click back on. So I'll give it just a moment here, about a minute, and it'll go ahead and reverse that change. And so there's a lot of things I didn't cover doing DevOps at scale. I didn't cover a lot of details, different architectures and patterns, and cloud provider differences, and integrating your existing security tools. All those are also big problems. There's only so much that I can cover in a 20-minute session here, and I already went a little bit over time. But hopefully I gave you guys some ideas of the challenges as you scale this out, some of the different patterns and approaches you can take to the different parts of the problem. The biggest thing is really take advantage of what your cloud provider has, and as well as really make sure that automation is absolutely going to be the only way you're going to be able to go ahead and survive in this world. And I'll do my last refresh here. Click on that security group, and you can see that change was fully reversed. No external security tools doing anything there. It actually was all handled natively within the actual Amazon infrastructure itself. So that's it. Thank you for the time and the extra time.